Good morning, and I saw some of you at the debates last night, and if you're watching our friend Osama defend the prophethood of Muhammad and argue against the deity of Christ and the crucifixion of Jesus, and later when we talk about ISIS, starts arguing that it was a massive Jewish conspiracy. ISIS is not actually run by Muslims, it's run by Mossad agents, and the CIA is behind everything, and Jewish agents are behind everything, and 9/11 was a Jewish conspiracy, and so on. And you see this, and you think, man, this guy needs help, right? And the message of the gospel is that everyone needs help, and people need to be regenerated, and that comes through the gospel. And so we have something that people need, and we have to share that. Do we have a PowerPoint? Got a PowerPoint for me? Is that a new guy? Oh, there we go. Okay. So, our good friend Osama needs some help. But there are people like Pastor Dan who believe you just love people into the kingdom. And I'm just kidding. He doesn't believe that. He believes in being loving, but he understands the importance of truth, or he wouldn't host debates here at the church. But it's true that there are people who just come from bad backgrounds and have never really been loved, and you show them love, and they are going to pay close attention to what it is that you believe. There are other people who are drawn by love in a different way, especially in Islam. One of the common reasons from people who convert to Christianity from Islam that you'll hear is they compared the God of Islam with the God of Christianity. Masad Yusuf, the son of Hamas, the guy who wrote the book Son of Hamas, who was the son of one of the founders of Hamas who became a Christian, he said that his path to Christianity started when he read Jesus commanding his followers to love their enemies, and he thought, "What are you talking about? I'm supposed to hate my enemies. What do you mean? What do you mean love them?" And so he saw the difference there. And there are still other kinds of Muslims who are convinced that all of the evidence supports Islam and there's overwhelming evidence against Christianity, and so it's just irrational to believe in Christianity with all the problems we have, and it's irrational to reject Islam with all the clear proof. And in those situations, that's where apologetics comes in, and that is a biblical teaching that we do apologetics, and we'll be looking at some of all of this as we go on. But I'm only involved in Islam, really, because my best friend in college was a Muslim. And it's back then that I started seeing some of the differences between how Muslims react to the gospel and how other people react. I was arguing with my friend Nabil in an airport. We were arguing about the resurrection. And we were both on the speech and debate team. We were headed on a trip. We're arguing about the resurrection of Jesus, and a girl that we hadn't talked to before, who's also just joined the speech and debate team, walks up to us, and I had said something along the lines of, "That's not going to work with me, Nabil. I come from a trailer park," right? Which I used to say to mean that I had common sense, right? Unlike his school learning, I just had common sense. I'm not going to believe anything that comes along. I come from the trailer park, right? As soon as I said, "I come from the trailer park," she steps up and goes, "I come from single-celled organisms." And we both turned to her and like, what are you talking about, right? And so she wanted to get into an argument with us. And we're like, "Look, we're talking about the resurrection here." And then she understood the argument, and she says, "You're both right." And we both turned to her and we're like, "What are you talking about? I'm saying Jesus rose from the dead. He's saying Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Those are the only two options. One of us has to be right, the other has to be wrong. Under no circumstances are we both right." And what she had meant was all religious claims are sort of, they're equally false, but since people believe them, they're sort of equally on the same footing and so on. And anyway, Nabil and I both turned on her, and we all ended up arguing. And but that girl Marie, we enjoyed arguing so much that we eventually got married. But what was interesting is she was an aggressive. She didn't consider herself an atheist. She considered herself agnostic. She doesn't know what's true, but she's an aggressive, argument-starting agnostic. And 2 weeks later, she was a Christian. So I liked her, so I put all my apologetic energies into talking to her. But two weeks later, hey, I've shown you. I've shown you what the evidence is for the existence of God. I've shown you that every shred of historical evidence we have tells us that Jesus rose from the dead, that he died on the cross and rose from the dead. You got something better than this? And then it comes down to, why am I rejecting? It's not based on evidence that I'm rejecting Christianity. And she becomes a Christian. And I'm comparing that with Nabil, my friend Nabil, who, no matter how much evidence we lay out, it's just, I will come up with every absurd response I can, to the point where, there's massive conspiracies behind the scene, like Osama, right? But it's different because Nabil's believing it, in the history of Christianity. There's these massive conspiracies to corrupt teachings and corrupt doctrines and so on, and it's just much more difficult. And so I realize that Islam presents different kinds of challenges. You've got an agnostic. That agnostic might not have any belief in God or belief in Christianity, but also doesn't have a lot of the same objections that Muslims would have to the gospel. And so it might be something simple like just laying out a case and then laying out the gospel. But with Muslims, many of them have been taught the exact opposite of what we believe on certain and very important issues. And I noticed this while having a discussion with Nabil. It's kind of a funny story. We were heading to our first trip, and there were several girls, and there were 4 guys, and the guys had to share 2 hotel rooms, so it was two to a room. There was a really, really flamboyant gay guy on the team, and he called himself Madonna with a RuPaul twist, and so it was really, really, really out there. And Nabil and I step off the bus, and we go, "Want to share a room?" Yep, and we took off, and. We were friends, but, sharing a hotel room, that's a little, we were friends with the guy, but, sharing a hotel room, wow, that's scary. So so Nabil and I end up in the hotel room, and I know he's a Muslim. He's over there putting away his prayer rug, and I'm reading my Bible, and I'm praying, God, don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this guy. Don't want to be called, a bigot or a hate monger for telling this guy that he's wrong, but I don't know. You might have put him here in this room with me, so I don't know, but I don't want to start the conversation, so if you want me to talk to him, let him start it. And then he says, "So, are you a hardcore Christian?" It's like, all right, that's the invitation there. So Nabil and I, we had a tournament. We go to the tournament during the day, and then we were arguing all night, and he's telling me the Bible's been corrupted, and Jesus never made these claims about himself, and Jesus didn't die on the cross and didn't rise from the dead, and Islam is founded upon logic and reason and evidence, and all the historical evidence and all the scientific evidence and everything supports Islam. And I'm thinking, I grew up as an atheist. I already been through all this, so you don't know who you're messing with right now. But I'm just going to keep quiet here for a few minutes. And so Nabil just laid out everything he believed, and at the end of it all, I said, "If you're wrong, do you want to know it?" And that's an important question to ask, because some people don't want to know it. And so I asked them, and if they say yes, well, that's the second invitation right there. They say, "Yes, I want to know if I'm wrong." Okay, well, since you want to know, I wasn't going to tell you, but since you want to know that you're wrong, I'll be happy to share that with you. But Nabil gave an interesting response. He said yes and no. He said, yes, I'd want to know the truth about God, but no, because it would destroy my life. And there, you see a big difference. I became a Christian from atheism was not a big deal to my family. Right? It was not a huge issue. Is not a very huge issue to many people in the West, but that is a radical life change for a Muslim because of what is going to happen with his family. And so I stuck with the yes part, and we'll just put the no aside for now. And we started having discussions, and we discussed things for a long time, many years, and we became best friends. Nabil is from the most peaceful sect of Islam, a sect that has actually reinterpreted the violent commands of Islam. But even then, coming from the most peaceful sect of Islam, a sect whose motto is love for all, hatred for none, which is weird because the Quran says something very different. The Quran says Allah has no love for unbelievers. Chapter 3, verse 32, if you want to look it up. But their motto is love for all, hatred for none. And even then, I noticed a problem. Once we started hanging out, and we're best friends, and I would go eat dinner at his house and hang out all night. One night we're sitting there, and he says, hey, check out these pictures my cousin sent me. And this was right after September 11th attacks. And he said, hey, check this out. And it's New York, so this is 2001, but it's supposedly a postcard, 2006. So this is what, in 2001, New York is going to look like 5 years into the future. And it was the picture was titled New York City Mosque Line. Right? See all the photoshopped mosques into the picture. And the idea was the September 11th attacks had leveled the ground for the construction of new mosques. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. This guy's from the peaceful sect of Islam. He doesn't agree with these attacks. But even he, coming from the most peaceful background, growing up in the West, his parents were immigrants from Pakistan, but even he can see something amusing here that most people would not be amused by. And then he showed me this one. These all came in one batch. Of course, the Statue of Liberty under a veil. And George W. That's the good one there. But he's showing me these, and I sort of put it all together that this isn't an Islamic challenge. It's Islamic challenges. Islam presents various kinds of challenges to us as people in the West and as Christians. So we have kind of two things included in the topic facing the Islamic challenge. One, that there is an Islamic challenge. Some people would say there is no Islamic challenge. I would like to know what color the sky is in your world. But the other is that we can face it biblically, and that there are biblical guidelines for dealing with various kinds of issues. So we're going to look at three different kinds of challenges that are posed by Islam. And this is the one I'll probably spend most of my time focusing on. Pastor Dan said I could take as long as I want, so please pay attention, or I will start all over again, and we'll just keep going through it. But this, I think, is a very important one, because this is something that everyone can just get very quickly. We think, there are these tons of Muslim sources and tons to learn about Islam and Muslim objections, and no. Yes, there is tons of information you could learn about Islam and history of Muhammad and the Quran and the Hadith and the Sirah and the Tafsir and all these things, but the apologetics is much, 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 much easier than most people are aware of. And you can actually respond to some of the most common Muslim arguments very easily. 2 hours of training, and you could get the top 5 or 6 Muslim objections, the ones that you will hear probably 95, 98% of the time, and could just stun any Muslim you're talking to who starts objecting to Christianity. Very simple. But just to see what the problem here is, challenge number one, Islam contradicts the core teachings of the gospel. And here I'm referring to specifically doctrines of Jesus' death by crucifixion for sins, his resurrection from the dead, and his divine nature. These are the core teachings of the gospel, and that Jesus preached these things, but he preached all kinds of things. But the takeaway message that the apostles went around and preached, they always touched on Jesus died for sins, he rose from the dead, and he is Lord, so you need to submit to him. You see this over and over and over again in the book of Acts. So this is the gospel, and Islam denies all three of the core elements of the gospel. So this is why you might talk to an agnostic or an atheist who doesn't believe in God or doesn't believe in Christianity, but doesn't have any particular objection to someone dying for sins or something like that. Whereas in Islam, they're taught you can't do that. They're taught the opposite of the fundamental teachings of the gospel. So let's look at a couple of passages really quickly. Chapter 6, verse 164, say, what? Shall I seek a Lord other than Allah? And he is the Lord of all things, and no soul earns evil but against itself, and no bearer of burden shall bear the burden of another. Then to your Lord is your return, so he will inform you of that in which you differed. No bearer of burden shall bear the burden of another. You have to deal with your own sins here. You have to deal with your own sins. No one's gonna bear your burden for you. Chapter 4, verse 157 to 158, these are the Jews, they said in boast, we killed Christ Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, but they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. And those who differ therein are full of doubts with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow, for of a surety they killed him not, nay, Allah raised him up unto himself, and Allah is exalted in power wise. Notice, they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. Muhammad explained this to his followers. Allah took someone and disguised him, made him supernaturally disguised him, made him look like Jesus. Took one of his followers, took one of Jesus' followers. Muslims today will say it was Judas. Right, so Allah takes Judas, disguises him, makes him look like Jesus. Then Judas is crucified, but everyone thinks that it's Jesus because Allah had disguised him. Jesus is taken to heaven. He's safe in heaven. Judas is crucified in his place. So Jesus obviously didn't die for sins because Jesus never died. It was Judas. Notice, why have billions of Christians over the years believed that Jesus died on the cross for sins? You can't say, oh, the Apostle Paul corrupted it, the Council of Nicaea corrupted it. Allah corrupted that. Right? Allah is the one, according to Islam, who made people think that Jesus died by crucifixion. And we have to ask ourselves why. You see, I wouldn't have much of a problem with God tricking someone over something. If I'm walking out of here and a gang of people want to kill me and God tricks them into thinking I went one way when I actually went a different way, I wouldn't have any problem by that. But this is God tricking people for no reason. Jesus is safe in heaven. He's not doing it to protect Jesus. But he tricks people into believing that Jesus died. Why? And there's just no real reason. Once you have that in your theology, I don't know how you know what to believe, right? I don't know how you believe anything. In other words, if you're going to say God just decided to trick the Jews and Jesus' followers, no real reason, I mean, how do you know God didn't have a problem with Arabs and said, I'm sending them a false prophet named Muhammad to trick and deceive them? I mean, how do you know anything? And by the way, this is extreme in Islam, the implications of a God who would trick and deceive people. Abu Bakr was Muhammad's closest companion, his father-in-law, because Muhammad married his Abu Bakr's daughter. His closest companion, he's the first rightly guided caliph. Abu Bakr said, if I had one foot in paradise, I would still fear Allah's deception. You could have one foot in paradise. You see your virgins over there, and you're still thinking, what if Allah is just tricking me? And he's about to send me into hell. This is some scary stuff. 9:30, and the Jews say Uzair, that's Ezra, is the son of Allah, and the Christians say the Messiah is the son of Allah. These are the words of their mouths. They imitate the saying of those who disbelieved before. May Allah destroy them how they are turned away. May Allah destroy us for saying that Jesus is the Son of God, saying that the Messiah is the Son of God. Look at one more. Chapter 5, verse 116. This denies the Trinity. Well, denies what was thought to be the doctrine of the Trinity. And remember, when Allah will say on the day of resurrection, O Jesus, son of Mary, did you say unto men, worship me and my mother as two gods besides Allah? He will say, glory be to you. It was not for me to say what I had no right to say. Had I said such a thing, you would surely have known it. Chapter 5 denies the deity of Christ, tells us not to believe in the Trinity. And here we get to where we actually have defined for us what we believe. Who's in the Trinity here? Allah, Jesus, who else? Mary. No Christian group, Orthodox or heretical, has ever taught a Trinity made up of God, Jesus, and Mary, who are separate gods who just kind of work together. But that's what the author of the Quran believed, which is very strange if it's God, right? God knows what we believe, right? So is God tricking people into thinking we believe something about the Trinity? In other words, I would understand someone like Muhammad hearing us say Trinity, hearing us say Jesus, hearing us say the Father, hearing us say Mary. Oh, that's what they mean. Well, that's not what we meant. That's not what we mean. But that's what the Quran says. It's funny because you run into Muslims. No, that is what you believe in the Trinity. No, it's not. No one believes that about the Trinity. No, it is. That is. It's right here. So, God's not a Trinity. Jesus isn't Lord. He isn't the Son of God. He didn't die on the cross, so he didn't rise from the dead. And no one can die for sins. So, all the core elements of the Christian gospel are gone in Islam. And so, that's a challenge because Muslims, unlike agnostics or atheists, they just believe the opposite on the fundamentals of the gospel. And so, what's a biblical response to this sort of thing? This is where apologetics comes in because they were dealing with the same thing back then too. The apostles were dealing with the same thing. 1 Peter 3:15, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense. And that's where we get our word apologetics from, make a defense. To everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. The apologetics there, by the way, has nothing to do with apologizing It means giving an answer, giving a defense. It's related to the word apologizing because you're supposed to be giving a defense of what you did. And so we do apologetics to respond to objections to what we believe. And as I pointed out, this is much easier than what lots of people think. They're not sure what sort of things Muslims are going to bring. It's very easy to respond to Muslim arguments. And I'll give you three right here. These are the three most common objections to Christianity. You can go talk to 1,000 Muslims right now. You will find that these are the three most common objections you will hear. I've seen this over years and years and years. And by the way, it's cool because I had to learn a lot of this by trial and error, right? So I go talk to a Muslim and find something out, and he raises an objection, and I'm not sure, and then I go back and look into it and so on. And so it's cool because Christians don't all have to learn everything for themselves along the way, right? The other people learn things and then can share them with me, and people can learn things and share them with you. And one of the things that you can learn is, what do I need to prepare for ahead of time? And fortunately, there are people who've been dealing with Islam for years and can tell you these are the things that Muslims are going to bring, which allows you to be prepared ahead of time so that when you talk to a Muslim, you know what he's going to say ahead of time. And I've actually given presentations where we're just focusing on people who are going out to some kind of outreach to Muslims, and we don't have long to prepare, so I just say, look, get ready for these 3 or 4 or 5 things. And every time people come back and say, they said exactly what you said they were going to say. These are the same objections over and over again, but that means you can prepare ahead of time. And so we'll look at these 3. Again, any discussion you get in with Muslims, you're going to hear some combination of these. Where did Jesus say, I am God, worship me? How can God die? The Bible has been corrupted. And lots of people would look at that and say, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. By the way, where did Jesus say, I am God, worship me? Where did he say, I am God, worship me? Those words. This is how the challenge gets presented. Nowhere. You see that? But you believe that Jesus is God and that he should be worshipped, and you're believing something that Jesus didn't even say. You see how silly and ridiculous you Christians are? You have to be careful of what you might call the exact words criterion here, where I tell you a sentence that I'm looking for, because people fall for that. Wow, I don't know where Jesus said those words, right? But you can flip that back. You can say, well, show me where Jesus said, I'm only a prophet, don't worship me. Or, matter of fact, show me that in the Bible or the Quran. I'm only a prophet, don't worship me. Those words. Oh, he didn't say it. You see, Islam's false, right? So you can use that either way. But the question is, once you get past that, you can say, are you looking for some place that Jesus claimed to be God? And there are tons of examples. I'm sure many of you are familiar with all kinds of examples. I'm going to give you an easy one, because I know that Muslims like to reinterpret. Muslims like to reinterpret passages that you might bring up. So when you're pointing out where Jesus claims this or that, and they'll say, what he really meant was something different from him being Lord or him being God. The Quran can actually help. I don't believe in the Quran, but I will use it to block reinterpretation or block objections. For instance, if a Muslim says, I don't believe in the resurrection because I don't believe in miracles, I would say, then you're not being a Muslim, right? Because the Quran affirms miracles. So an atheist can say that, a Muslim can't. But you can actually block them from reinterpreting text. And I have an entire article. If you Google, where did Jesus say, I am God, worship me? I put together a list of things Allah says about himself in the Quran, that he is the only one who can say these things, according to the Quran. And then you find Jesus saying the exact same things about himself in the Bible. And so the Muslim can't reinterpret them and say he meant something else. According to Islam, no one can say those things but Allah. And I'll just give you a quick example right here, because it's an easy one to remember if you want a couple of verses. But think about this. If you just get down a couple of verses, one or two verses of the Quran, a couple of verses from the Bible, and you know there's only a couple of objections they're going to use, you can seriously stun a Muslim because he's been taught you have nothing. You have no responses to these awesome objections. Chapter 57, verses 1 through 3 of the Quran. Whatever is in the heavens and on earth, let it declare the praises and glory of Allah, for he is the exalted in might, the wise. To him belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. It is he who gives life and death, and he has power over all things. You can actually go sort of line by line in this passage and show where Jesus makes claims that only Allah can make according to the Quran. But the one I want to focus on is in verse 3. It says, He is the first and the last, the evident and the hidden, and He has full knowledge of all things. The first and the last, those are two of Allah's 99 names, because He is the first, nothing can come before Him. He's the last, nothing can come after Him. If you're familiar with the book of Isaiah, Yahweh says the exact same thing in the Old Testament, chapter 44, verse 6. And that's where Yahweh says, I am the first and the last, beside me there is no God. And so once you've covered that with your Muslim friend, that this is a title of Allah in the Quran, it's a title of Yahweh in the Bible, you've just agreed that according to the Bible and the Quran, God is the first and the last. And your Muslim friend will agree with that. And since you've established that, now you have something that only God can say. No mere human being can claim to be the first and the last. And that's when you hand the Bible to your Muslim friend and say, all right, start reading. You can give them a little background on what the book of Revelation is. But chapter 1, verse 17, John sees a vision. He says, When I saw Him, I fell at His feet like a dead man, and He placed His right hand on me, saying, Do not be afraid, I am the first and the last. And pause there and say, who's talking? Unless he thinks you're up to something, he's going to say, oh, God. Right, and then you keep reading. I am the first and the last, and the living one, and I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and of Hades. When did Allah die? Of course, that's Jesus talking there. And your Muslim friend has just said, that's God. So you're telling me to show you where Jesus said, I'm God. You just said this God, not me. I asked you who that was speaking. You said God. And so you're no longer a Muslim. So believe in the gospel, right? But think about that. There's nothing hard about that, right? Here's a claim that the Quran makes, so you cannot reinterpret this because even according to your own book, no one can say this but God, and here's Jesus saying it. You can do that passage after passage after passage. And so your Muslim friend's not allowed to reinterpret. So where did Jesus claim to be God? Well, all over, but that's a quick, simple example, and the Muslim's going to be shocked if you can give that. How can God die, right? Because this is the first and the last, and yet he says, and he was dead, but that makes no sense to a Muslim. God is eternal, incorruptible. But you believe that Jesus is God, and you believe that Jesus died. And so they're thinking that we have some massive problem in our thinking. And this just comes up, you will hear this over and over and over again. And if you try to start breaking down theology and the incarnation, they're just going to, that's ridiculous, that's incoherent, ridiculous nonsense. And so here's a situation, and this comes in helpful in all kinds of ways. If a Muslim is objecting to something in Christianity, and you can show him that a similar objection would destroy Islam, and you point out, hey, watch what you say, because you might be attacking your own religion here, suddenly they get much more careful about saying what's incoherent and nonsensical. But here's a situation where you might have to explain Islamic theology in order to get them to understand Christian theology, because there is a parallel, and this is a parallel with the Quran. According to Islamic theology, the Quran is Allah's eternal word. It has no beginning. It was uncreated. It's co-eternal with Allah. It's Allah's speech, which has always been. So the Quran, the word of Allah, is eternal. It's unchanging. It's incorruptible. But now I'm confused. This is what you say to your Muslim friend. Now I'm confused because I open this Quran and Amana Publications, 2011. You telling me this book is eternal? It's made of paper and glue and ink. It's going to fall apart. People have burned the Quran before. Uthman, the third rightly guided caliph, gathered all the Qurans together and burned them because there were differences. What do you mean it's incorruptible or unchanging or it's eternal? What are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense to me. This book has a beginning. It will have an end. It is changeable. It is corruptible. How can you believe that this is eternal? You've got this huge incoherent belief system, my Muslim friend. And if you really start digging deeply, you find out that according to Islamic theology, the Quran has two natures. It has a divine nature. It's not God, but it is Allah's speech. But it is the eternal word of Allah. It also has a physical nature when it enters into our world. It takes on a physical nature, either written in someone's heart or written on paper and glue and ink. And so the Quran has two natures. And once, the Muslim believes this, but he's never thought about it. And once you've explained, hey, you're supposed to believe that the Quran has these two natures, now I understand, my Muslim friend, your belief system is not incoherent on this issue. So now I get it. The Quran, Allah's eternal word, that's eternal and incorruptible and unchangeable. It has no beginning and no end. But it enters our world in a physical form made of paper and glue and ink that is corruptible, has a beginning, can be destroyed. Now I get it. Now I understand what you believe. But tell me again, why was the Christian view silly and incoherent? The claim that Jesus, that in the beginning was the Word is with God, the Word was God, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and since the Word became flesh and has a physical nature, that physical nature can die on the cross, but you wouldn't say that his divine, eternal nature was destroyed? What was incoherent about that? And I've never brought that up where the Muslim didn't just immediately change the subject, because now he cannot attack our view without also attacking the Islamic view of the Quran. If it's silly and incoherent for something to have an eternal nature and a physical nature, then it's incoherent for them too. So they can't say it. So it's time to change the subject and go on to a different one. So by the time you've shown that Jesus in the Bible claims to be God, that Jesus in the Bible is the incarnate Word who took on flesh to die for sins, at this point, all the Muslim can say is your Bible's been corrupted. Because in Islam, chapter 3, verses 3 through 4, for instance, of the Quran, say that Allah inspired the Torah and the Gospel. But we've just seen what the Gospel says, and you can find passages in the Torah which contradict Islam as well. But the Torah and the Gospel contradict Islam, and Allah inspired them. That means they must have been corrupted, right? Because Allah inspired them, but they don't agree with Islam. So they must have changed along the way, and that's why they don't line up. Because the alternative is the author of the Quran had no clue what he's talking about, and the Muslim can't believe that. So he has to believe that the Bible's been corrupted. The problem here is, and your Muslim friend doesn't know this, don't overestimate how much you think your Muslim friends know about the Quran. I would say 95% or more have never read these passages when I quote them to them out of the Quran. They have no clue what I'm talking about. They're seeing this for the first time. But what you find is the Quran affirms not only the inspiration of the Torah and the Gospel, but also the preservation and authority of the Gospel. No one can change Allah's words according to the Quran. The Torah and the Gospel are Allah's words, and Christians are commanded to judge by the Gospel. That's what we're supposed to judge by. What Gospel do we have? What Gospel was around in the time of Muhammad, before the time of Muhammad, after the time of Muhammad? We know what the answer is. And if you say what we have is something different, why does Allah tell us to judge by it? So here are two quick passages. There are many more. There are plenty of this. We can do entire presentations on what we call the Islamic dilemma. But chapter 5, verse 47, let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah hath revealed therein. If any do fail to judge by the light of what Allah hath revealed, they are no better than those who rebel. Notice, people of the gospel, Christians, judge by what Allah hath revealed therein. And what? The gospel. So what Muslims say, hey, stay away from that gospel. You need to judge by the Quran. Not what Allah says in the Quran. He tells me to judge by the gospel. Well, yeah, but the gospel has changed. It's different. Really? Because 1827 says, and recite what has been revealed to you of the book of your Lord. There is none who can alter his words. But you're telling me Allah's words have been changed. So the Quran is a lie. It says no one can change his words. Your Muslim friend has never read this. He'll say, oh, this only applies to the Quran. That's not what it says. It says no one can change his words. Well, the Torah and the Gospel are his words. So if you're telling me not to judge by what I have, you're telling me Allah's words have been changed, you're telling me I'm not supposed to judge when Allah tells me to judge by the Gospel, you're telling me his words have been changed when the Quran says his words haven't been changed, no one can change his words, all kinds of problems. And so you can just now notice, your Muslim friend is cornered by now. He can't reject the gospel because then you say Islam is false. And you've already seen that the gospel affirms Jesus' death, his resurrection, his deity, and so there's nowhere to go. All right, that's the sort of apologetic challenge. Again, those are the three most common things. They're not that difficult. There's nothing I just said that anyone in here couldn't say and more. And so these are not, no one in here has anything to fear. All right, so we spent most of the time on that. We'll go through this very quickly. Islam places massive barriers between Muslims and the gospel. Let's read a passage very quick. Chapter 4, verse 116. Allah forgiveth not the sin of joining other gods with him, but he forgiveth whom he pleaseth other sins than this. One who joins other gods with Allah hath strayed far, far away from the right. Allah can forgive all kinds of sins, but that one, uniting something with Allah, that's the one he's not going to forgive. So saying that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are the one God, that's the sin of shirk. That's the unforgivable sin. Allah can forgive anyone else, anything else, but he's not going to forgive that one. And so when you tell a Muslim, believe in the gospel, believe in Jesus as Lord, as the apostles did, you're saying, do this thing that Allah says you're going straight to hell for. Very difficult. But Islam multiplies these problems by the family pressure. Muslims understand, hey, if I leave Islam, I might have to lose my family. And the penalty in Islam for apostasy is death. It doesn't get carried out much in the West, but you always have to be wondering, is someone going to eventually decide to carry out what Muhammad said about apostates? So the message of the gospel that Muslims are hearing when we think, hey, people who don't believe in Christianity are drug dealers and prostitutes and life is going to get so much better for them if they accept the gospel. When you're telling a Muslim to convert to Christianity, you're saying get ready to go through a very, very difficult life. But do it all anyway. And the positive side here is that's how things were in the first century, right? You would have to give up everything for Christ. But when you're that sort of person who says, yeah, I've been told this is going to get me sent to hell. I may have to give up my family, my entire community. I may get beheaded for it. But I'm willing to do that for Jesus. That's someone who will lay down his life for the gospel, right? And that's why we do this. Here is something we can do, though, since we're responding to the challenge biblically. Responding to the idea that, shirk and so on, that would fall into the apologetics category, but there's something additional here in that Muslims might have to give up their families. Again, it was the same in the first century, and there's actually something biblical to do here. Chapter 10, verses 29 to 30 of the Gospel of Mark. Jesus said, truly I say to you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or farms for my sake and for the gospel's sake, but that he will receive 100 times as much now in the present age, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and farms, along with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. This is a very interesting passage. Jesus, we believe in you. We have to, I'm losing my family. My inheritance is getting cut off. I'm losing everything. Yeah. But you're going to get much more, right? Because his community is going to be a different kind of community. And I think Christians are eventually going to have to get used to, if we want Muslims to be able to really face the struggle and say, I'm going to have to live my family, biblically, they're supposed to have another family to come to, right? There's supposed to be another family waiting on them to say, yes, you will. I know that's heartbreaking, but you have a much bigger family now. And so I think there has to be open doors to Muslims who are giving up everything for the gospel. And yes, my friends, you are going to have persecutions, but you have a big family to help you through those persecutions. And finally, one we talked about a lot last night, Islam calls for the global implementation of Sharia, for the subjugation of unbelievers and so on. Just look at a couple passages real quick, and we'll close out. Chapter 9, verse 29. If you wanted to ever learn a verse on Islam being peaceful and tolerant, there are lots of them, but this would be a good one. This talks specifically about Christians and Jews. There's a command, fight those who believe not in Allah. Notice, it does not say fight people who are attacking you, fight people who are bombing you. It doesn't say anything like that. Fight those who do not believe in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger. So if your religion doesn't forbid the same things that Islam forbids, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book are Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission. The jizya is tribute money you pay in acknowledgement of your inferior status. with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So until you understand your secondary place in society. This is for Christians and Jews. We have it better than pagans, polytheists, things like that. There it's convert or die. We get the option of paying the jizya, an acknowledgement that something better has come along. We do not want to convert to it. We are willing to pay tribute money for not being killed. There's a command of Allah. And we have some words of Muhammad. Muslim Ahmed, the prophet of Allah, said, that's Muhammad, the whole earth has been shown to me until I saw the east of the east and the west of the west, and I saw the authority of Islam ruled all that I saw. So when you obey Allah's commands, Allah is going to bless you, and this is what you're going to have. When you look at what ISIS is doing, you see them running around. They're killing anyone they regard as a hypocrite or an apostate, or that's a kind of jihad of cleansing, right? If Allah is going to bless us to take over the world, we have to purify ourselves. It's because of our disobedience that we have not blessed with fulfilling these prophecies. And so we have to cleanse ourselves of all impurity, and then Allah will bless us to take over. Theology matters sometimes. And here's another one from Muslim Ahmed. Muhammad said, bring glad tidings to this ummah, that's the Muslim community. She will have the power, the pride, the deen, the victory, the authority on earth. So he who worked to reap the rewards in this life rather than in the hereafter, he would have no reward in the hereafter. So we're going to take over the world. So these are obvious. This is obviously a very, very difficult challenge. And, we wonder what we can do, right? What can you do, about ISIS or something like that? Even here, we have some biblical guidance. And here you can think about the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 25, where the Roman governor, Festus, wants to hand him over, wants to do something to where he gets captured and killed because he wants to get in good with the people who really hate Paul. And Paul says, if I have done something worthy of death, I do not hesitate to die. But if I haven't, you have no right to hand me over to them. And that's when he appealed to Caesar. So he's talking to the Roman governor here, and he says, you're supposed to be protecting my rights. If you won't, I will appeal to someone over you. So he has this idea that the role of a government, which in Romans 13 is instituted by God, you've been given power and authority as leaders by God, but you can be called by people like the Apostle Paul to do the right thing and to protect people's rights. And so even here we can have a kind of gospel message for our leaders in that, look, you need to be protecting people's rights. And just to clarify, this didn't work out for Paul. At the end, you can't, sometimes governors and rulers just do bad things. But that doesn't mean we don't call on them to do what they're supposed to do. So here we have a massive challenge with ISIS. We're in a situation where, we can't prevent a lot of the suffering directly, but we can call on governments and leaders and organizations, hey, you need to protect people from being hurt and persecuted and killed. And I just talked with a girl on our show on the Trinity Channel the other night. She lives in Denmark. She's an Arab Christian living in Denmark, grew up in Denmark, had to go to a crisis shelter in Copenhagen because Muslims there were threatening to kill her. Because she called the police when they surrounded her car and they threatened her. She called the police, and that's it. Now you're in a crisis shelter because we're going to rape and kill you. This is in Denmark, right? Things are spreading. Things are spreading. So there comes a point when we have to say, look, leaders who have power, you need to start protecting people's rights and protecting people who are persecuted. And so when we do this, when we learn our apologetics and we learn how to respond to arguments, and we have open arms towards our Muslim friends, then cool things can happen. This is my friend Nabil from college. That's his baptism. Nabil. I want to say, keep in mind, this was 4.5 years after we met, right? This is 4.5 years after we met. I want to say a lot of Christians were telling me I was wasting my time. David, you could be talking to all kinds of atheists, and they can convert so much more quickly, right? Spending all your years on this guy, because it's a lot more difficult. There are no Billy Graham crusades to Muslims where thousands of Muslims come down, right? It's a much longer process because of the obstacles and challenges we've talked about. But keep in mind, Nabil now works with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. He just came out with his book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And so I just want to say, this is difficult work. Dealing with Islam is difficult work. Sharing the gospel with Muslims, you don't get the sort of immediate fruits that you could see in other places. But we have an opportunity that Christians have not had in 14 centuries. For the entire history of Islam, you wanted to go preach the gospel to Muslims, you had a very good chance of getting killed. Now Muslims are coming to the West to work or for school, and we have the opportunity to share the gospel with them. And through technology, you have the opportunity to share the gospel today with a Muslim in Saudi Arabia, if you wanted, over on Facebook, right? So we have the opportunity to do all of this and respond to all of these challenges. And I mean, given the opportunity, the unprecedented opportunity that we have, Christians for centuries would have been just dreaming of. Why don't we all do this? This is an amazing opportunity, and I'm glad that you have a pastor who's interested in this kind of ministry. And I would encourage all of you here in Michigan. You have an opportunity that most Christians in the United States do not have. So I would encourage everyone to get involved.